Hey guys, tonight we plunge into the cavernous heart of one of the world's most guarded treasure troves, the Vatican's secret archives. You can almost taste the century-old dust as you press your finger against the centuries-worn oak door, and you probably won't survive this. Of goosebumps, I mean. Feel the cold draft sneaking under the edges, smell that faint whiff of aging vellum, and listen for whispered echoes bouncing off ancient marble walls. If you think you know secrets, think again. These vaults hold mysteries so deep, even the most seasoned scholars break into a cold sweat at the thought of a 2-year reading request. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is on your side of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Hey, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through a narrow antechamber flooded with stale air, okay? And the corridor beyond feels endless. Your footsteps echo alongside retiring candelabras that haven't been lit since the 18th century, or so they say. A single guard in crisp uniform nods, scanning your credentials. No pizza receipts allowed here. Sorry. The Archivio Segreto. Vaticano, Latin for Secret Vatican Archive, actually opened its doors officially in 1612 under Pope Paul V, granting select scholars access to documents dating back to the 8th century. That's a mainstream fact, no fringe theory required, but the secret in its name is as literal as it gets. The rules are brutal and borderline medieval. You can request only 3 boxes at a time, each weighing roughly as much as your college backpack after an all-night cram session. You get exactly 6 months on site, no extensions unless you bribe someone, joking, sort of. Once your time is up, they politely confiscate your notes and microfilms. Historians still argue whether this 6-month limit was set to protect genuine secrecy or to discourage anyone from stumbling onto, say, PayPal love letters from the Renaissance. Modern asides aside, you find yourself tracing your fingers over the spines of volumes thicker than a king-size mattress. By day 2, the novelty wears off and you notice the chill. It's not air conditioning, it's climate control for manuscripts. Hundreds of bankers' lamps glow green and gold, illuminating Latin script and minute pen strokes, while the humidity hovers at exactly 54%, so the parchment doesn't turn into confetti. One quirky rumor says a hidden wing houses letters from Cleopatra herself, penned to Mark Antony in a smudged Greek script. If that's true, it would rewrite every textbook you own. Whether it's real or just convent gossip remains part of the appeal. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's correspondence ever reached Rome's shelves or was quietly spirited back to Egypt centuries ago. As you advance deeper, the aisles narrow, and the air smells faintly of must and mildew, laced with the clinical scent of preservation chemicals. You joke to a friend that it's like walking through centuries-old laundry, but the guard gives you a suspicious look, no laughing aloud. Every vertical shelf is meticulously labeled by century and topic: PayPal bulls, diplomatic dispatches, Inquisition records, so-called sensitive dossiers. One mainstream fact: some date-stamped documents mention Napoleon's removal of archives to Paris in 1798. A heist that ended up back at the Vatican 2 decades later. Those volumes bear the faintest French imperial stamp, barely visible under centuries of rubbing in between official catalogs. You stumble upon a whispered fringe tidbit, a locked cabinet with no external label, just for carved symbols resembling alchemical runes. Legend claims it contains instructions for transmuting lead into gold. It's pilfered from a 14th century cardinal who fancied himself an amateur alchemist. You tap the wood lightly, but it doesn't budge. Behind you, a colleague shivers and mutters that She heard a rumor the Vatican once burned all the trial records of the Knights Templar in 1314 to erase any scandal. Historians still argue whether that purge was an act of political necessity or a cover-up to protect aristocratic patrons. Time crawls. By week 3, you've grown accustomed to the hush. Sometimes you catch yourself whispering grazie to the empty air. You pore over microfilm copies of 17th century correspondence about cheese shipments to Rome. Apparently, the church had a soft spot for pecorino. It's a quirky mainstream crossover. Holy orders, budgeting for lunch, leafing through PayPal. Account ledgers. You laugh at entries like 12 loaves of bread, 3 gallons of wine, 1 inflatable mattress. Okay, maybe not the last one. But every floorboard creak makes you jump. As if the archives themselves are alive, despite the strict catalog. Gaps appear: walnut shelves with empty slots, canned registry entries listing documents marked expurgatus or non visum not to be seen. These Latin tags are your first real hint that some folders are off limits. It's not just to you, but to every historian on earth. The expurgated label suggests the church edited or destroyed. Certain passages may be records of clandestine alliances or embarrassing PayPal weaknesses under siege. Historians still argue whether those redactions were accidental casualties of time or intentional erasures of inconvenient truths. On your final day, you stand before a sealed blade door rumored to guard the most sensitive vault, the Archivum Arcana. Legend claims it stores files on exorcisms conducted from the Renaissance onward, shadowy cases of demonic possession suppressed for centuries. You look at the guard's stern face and the heavy iron lock that hasn't turned in a millennium. Sadly, your permit expires before you can push any further. You're escorted out through an iron-grilled balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square. It's the marble sun warming your cheeks after weeks of chill. As you step back into the bustle of modern Rome, you realize you've seen only a sliver of what's in those oak halls. The true depth remains concealed behind layers of bureaucracy, politics, and perhaps fear. And that, dear viewer, is why the Vatican's secret archives remain one of history's most tantalizing enigma-sane archive of power, its whispers, and the ever-present question, what are they not letting us see? You slip through a larched doorway that the guard swears he's never let anyone pass. And suddenly, you're swallowed by gloom, pierced only by a single swinging lantern. The air tastes faintly of soot and dried palm leaves. You brush past. A stack of tattered scrolls tied with crimson ribbon each promises stories that never made it into Bibles or blockbuster movies. Ahead, a heavy mahogany cabinet sits beneath a faded fresco of angels in mid-chorus, their paint flaking like breadcrumbs on an old monastery floor. You press your ear to the cool wood. You swear you hear the faint rustle of parchment, like a dozen tiny wings flapping in unison. This is where the lost Gospels lurk, manuscripts that vanished from public view. Spirited away by church elders who feared they'd steal Jesus's thunder, or worse. Challenge the status quo. You pull aside a velvet curtain and find a narrow lectern holding a single codex bound in cracked leather. Inside, the very first line reads in Greek, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke." That's the Gospel of Thomas. A non-canonical text buried until its dramatic rediscovery in 1945 at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a mainstream fact that reshaped early Christian studies overnight. Before then, this gospel lived only in whispers and copies burned by bishops who claimed its mystical tone smacked of heresy. Opening that fragile spine feels like swiping Netflix's worst-kept secret, except this show is too. It's millennia old and has 0 trailers. Historians still argue whether Thomas represents genuine sayings of Jesus or a later Gnostic riff meant to unsettle the Orthodox authorities behind you. A narrow alcove holds something even more obscure, a tattered fragment of what some call the Gospel of Mary. According to fringe lore, early communities revered Mary Magdalene's vision of post-resurrection wisdom. But church fathers quietly removed her voice from the canon. One quirky rumor claims the original Mary Gospel contained instructions for levitating during Parema, your Sunday service turning into a low-budget Cirque du Soleil act. Whether she's floating or not, the codex vanished sometime in the 3rd century. Recent legends insist a single leaf survived, hidden in a priest's prayer book until he gifted it to a farmer in rural France, who then used it to light his fireplace. The charred edges of that tale feel more campfire story than fact. Yet they persist. You shuffle through more fragments. The Gospel of Judas, decayed cages, labeled Liber Wellesley, in cramped Gothic script. Some texts promise scandalous twists Judas as the hero who freed Jesus from his mortal coil, while others detail secret rituals for unlocking hidden chambers beneath the temple in Jerusalem. Mainstream scholarship credits the Gospel of Judas to a mid-2nd century Gnostic sect. But original copies disappeared for centuries until a codex surfaced in the 1970s. Historians still argue whether those pages are authentic, ancient manuscripts, or clever forgeries cooked up to boost black market auction prices. You tap the glass case, joking that even the Vatican's archives have a side hustle in lost and found antiquities. Fingers trembling, you unroll a single scroll marked Non Canonicalum, Expurgatum, Latin for never to be published. Bugger. Off. This one allegedly contains a line where Jesus hiccups during the Last Supper, prompting a fellow apostle to quip about wine quality. If true, it would humanize the entire event, but the church erased it centuries ago for being too irreverent. You laugh to yourself that divine hiccups could have been the medieval equivalent of a viral TikTok, except no one uploaded it. Whether that line ever existed or was a priestly joke misfiled in a dinner menu remains lost beneath layers of redaction manuals. Historians still argue whether quirky notes like these were genuine eyewitness details or medieval scribes' attempts at dry humor. Your lantern flickers, throwing giant shadows on the fresco above, and you notice a narrow staircase leading down. Every family has dark basements, but few contain chapters of Christian lore the world forgot. As you descend, the air grows cold. Some say temperature drops, guard forbidden knowledge, not climate engineers. The walls narrow until you find yourself in a vaulted crypt lined with iron-bound chests. Each chest's label is engraved in secret code, sigilla, silentium, secreta. You tug at one and it creaks open to reveal a stack of leather-bound booklets so small they'd fit in your back pocket. Pocket apocrypha, if you will. You spot a title in tiny gold letters, Revelations of Pilate. It's said to contain Pontius Pilate's eyewitness account of crucifixion negotiations, never meant for public consumption. Fringe conspiracists claim these notes would have toppled empires by exposing political maneuvering at the highest levels. Lights dancing on gold leaf. You settle cross-legged on the cold flagstone floor, carefully opening the Pilate text. Parchment crackles like an ancient fire starter, and you can almost feel the tension of Jerusalem's streets in the ink. Mainstream historians broadly agree that Pilate's governance records were systematic, but none have ever produced original manuscripts, only references in later chronicles. Historians still argue whether any of these imperial notations ever made it to Rome before disgraceful recall. You scroll through bureaucratic jargon describing taxes, levied on olive harvests the same year the Senate debated early Christian assemblies. A sudden draft brushes your ear, and you realize you've spent hours in near silence, save for the occasional drip of condensation from above. By the time you fold the leather back and secure your finds, your heart is racing. You half expect the frescoed angels overhead to lean forward and scold you for meddling. You snake back up the stairs, gripping these lost voices of early Christianity like forbidden loot. In the hallway, the guard's eyebrow arches as you exhale, shushing you with a single finger. You might look like a humble scholar, but inside, you're buzzing with adrenaline, a nagging question: which lost gospel will next emerge from its dusty coffin? As you step back into the archive's warmer air, you know the hidden narratives of the Gospels are just the beginning of the vault's deeper enigmas. You push past a carved oak door marked simply Conciliarum and feel the air shift from dusty hush to the faint echo of quill tips scratching frantically. It's as if time has folded over itself, sliding you straight into a centuries-old committee meeting, but without the free donuts and awkward small talk. Here, the Church's most decisive and most contentious assemblies left behind mounds of minutes, letters and memoranda that never made it into the polished histories. You've left the faded gospel fragments behind and entered a world of grand marble tables, knee-high stools, and the lingering scent of ironed robes. Imagine a medieval boardroom minus the swivel chairs. On either side, bound volumes labeled Nicene in neat Latin script sit like sentinels. These are the official acts of the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where bishops from across the Roman world hammered out the Nicene Creed, codifying Christ's divinity in words still recited every Sunday. That's your mainstream factnacene. Council 325, the birth of Orthodox doctrine. But you already knew that, right? Scratch deeper, and you discover drawers of unpublished correspondence, letters from Eastern bishops complaining that the original draft sounded too much like philosophical jargon, with clauses so dense even Aristotle would have nodded off. Historians still argue whether those early drafts ever contained overt references to minor deities or were later thinned out to streamline official theology. A hush hangs over a long table set with charcoal-blackened ink pots and quill holders, shaped like tiny lambs, a quirky detail that looks oddly cute next to stacks of parchment. Legend has it that the Church provided honeyed wine laced with opium to keep the debate lively during marathon sessions. The rumor goes that one particularly irritable bishop proposed redefining the Holy Spirit as a cosmic cat, whatever that even means, only to be swooped off into a dreamy stupor before any voting took place. You snag a vial labeled council spirits and sniff it lavender with a suspiciously sweet aftertaste. Could be aromatherapy or just another fringe story fueled by the wine cellar's ghost. Historians still argue whether the so-called council spirits were medicinal, recreational, or the medieval equivalent of office espresso. You trace your fingertip along an iron-bound, Tal CD 451, where another critical council convened to tackle the nature of Christ's humanity versus divinity. The door swings open on rusty hinges, releasing a tiny cascade of dust motes dancing in the lantern light. You imagine 600 bishops shoulder to shoulder, leaning on walking sticks and grappling with Greek philosophical terms they barely understood. A nearby manuscript lists vote tallies by region Asia Minor, overwhelmingly in favor of the two natures position, Africa inclined toward a single unified essence. But then you spot a folded slip of vellum, half tucked beneath the margin, a note from an anonymous delegate complaining about the banquet menu, featuring boiled dormouse stuffed with raisins. You smirk, thinking of modern corporate retreats where the biggest scandal is stale coffee. The deeper you delve, the more gaps you find. Shelves marked Tridentine displayed the skeletal framework of the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, which spearheaded the Counter-Reformation. Official transcripts boast meticulous detail, indulgence reforms, seminary regulations, and papal decrees. Yet a locked drawer whispers of unpublished appendices, reports on clandestine debates about vernacular liturgy and whether priests could commission Baroque music during sermons. One fringe account hints at an entire subcommittee devoted to perfecting the acoustics of St. Peter's Basilica, perhaps the earliest form of ecclesiastical sound engineering. You run your fingers over the drawer's iron latch, imagining a team of robed audio engineers adjusting gospel echo. Historians still argue whether these sonorous sacraments, notes, ever existed, or are modern imaginings by musicologists with too much imagination. Soft Creak alerts you to a side cabinet labeled Acta non publica, Acts not for public eye. You slide open the door and find a dizzying array of envelopes stamped with red wax seals. Inside are scribbled annotations from advisors who argued for and against sanctioning certain philosophies, such as the integration of Aristotelian logic into theology. One surreptitious memo features a doodle in the margin, a bishop caricatured with a plumed hat and a speech bubble declaring, "I refuse to sign unless they bring more sausage rolls." You catch yourself chuckling, a rare sound in these hallowed halls. It's oddly comforting to know that, beneath the grandeur, clerics were just as petty and snack-obsessed as your coworkers. You notice a slim volume protruding from the back shelf, spine cracked and unlabeled. As you tug it free, the metal latch snaps off in your hands, Core 1 for modern dexterity. The tiny book is a record of secret synodal sessions held off official calendars, convened to wrestle with heresies too delicate for public mention. Mainstream historians often gloss over these shadow meetings, citing political expediency and scarce documentation. Yet this volume details heated debates about whether Christ's sweat in Gethsemane revealed his true human fears, so embarrassing. They supposedly redacted the entire passage. Historians still argue whether the authenticity of this clandestine record is genuine, or if it's a clever pastiche crafted by a bored medieval monk. Your lantern flickers, projecting dancing shadows across iron sconces and script-dense walls. The temperature dips, another reminder that you're far from any lobby's comfort and deep in archival solitude. You settle cross-legged on the cold stone floor, flip open the slim book, and find yourself reading lines penned in coded shorthand. Tempus brief dico, minors recessus, convivia proabenda. Loosely translated, time is short, I advocate for smaller recesses, ban the banquets. It's a pungent glimpse into ecclesiastical priorities. Sometimes it's more about logistics and feasting than eternal salvation. As you replace the manuscript, your mind drifts back to that Gospel of Thomas, tucked away in the lower stacks, both texts, revealing different faces of the church, one mystical and spiritual, the other bureaucratic and banal. You tuck your discoveries into a velvet-lined case, careful not to shake loose any secrets. The corridor outside remains silent, except for the faint hum of the archive's climate control system and the faintest echo of your own breath. You step back into the lamplit hallway, feeling the weight of untold volumes pressing down like silent sentinels, with your head buzzing from ancient debates over theology. Snacks and sonic echoes, you realize that church councils were more than solemn gatherings. They were political arenas, philosophical workshops, and yes, occasional gastronomic fairs. The unpublished acts you just glimpsed hint at power plays that shaped doctrines, suppressed dissent, and perhaps even decided the fate of souls in hushed backrooms. But remember, every ledger you've seen is curated, edited, it's been sometimes shredded to hide the raw tussles behind those polished rulings. As you exit the council chamber, you run a hand over your notes and wonder which closed-door debate will next surface to rewrite the story of faith, reason, and human ambition. You glide down a narrow corridor, the hum of the climate control system fading behind you as a fresh aura of tension seeps in. The walls here bear scorch marks from candle flames that once illuminated midnight meetings of cardinals and agents. You press your palm against an iron-studded door stamped with a papal tiara and keys, and it swings open on silent hinges. Instantly, you're hit with a wave of stale tobacco and spilled vermouth vintage bottles. You suspect, left open long enough for the room to drink the aroma. Welcome to the vault of papal conspiracies. Inside, mahogany desks form a semicircle. Around a central marble table marred by scorch scars and coffee rings. Microfilm reels lie in glass-top cabinets. Each labeled in neat cursive with mission code names like Operation Sunrise and Project Medici. You glimpse notes in Vatican shorthand referring to Monsignor contacts embedded within foreign courts, officially deniable. Gossipy hearsay informally dubbed the Holy See's Secret Service. A mainstream fact. Pope Pius XII maintained official neutrality during World War II, publicly urging peace to both Axis and Allied powers. That neutrality, however, masked behind-the-scenes negotiations you're about to unearth. Historians still argue whether his silence saved lives or shielded complicity. You lift a reel marked 1939 to 1945 and thread it onto a viewer. Ghostly images flicker into view. Black and white photographs of robed envoys, exchanging sealed packets with uniformed officers in shadowy courtyards. One shot shows a Swiss Guard officer slipping a pouch to a German diplomat under the stairwell of Castel Gandolfo. You shake your head, thinking of modern office bribes, but with higher stakes and more lace cuffs. Beneath the film cabinet, you find a side drawer, sealed with wax and bearing the legend, Nan per visit. You flick it open, revealing redacted telegrams from the papal nuncio in Berlin, complaining of increasing Jewish interference with the Reich's tranquility. The most damning phrases are scratched out entirely, replaced with black blobs, reminiscent of overzealous street art. Fringe whispers claim those redactions conceal a Vatican agreement to exchange Jewish refugees for religious artifacts looted by the Nazis. Imagine trading Santo Sudario fragments for safe passage. Whether any such bargain existed remains shrouded. Historians still argue whether Pius XII orchestrated clandestine rescue networks or allowed tragedy to unfold. You swivel to a nearby wall where a triangular bulletin board pinned with faded memos catches your eye. One memo, dated 1526, bears the seal of Pope Clement VII and references a discreet alignment with the League of Cognac. This Renaissance conspiracy involved Francis I of France, the Papal States, and the Holy Roman Emperor's rivals, plotting to curb Charles V's ever-expanding empire. Mainstream fact. The League of Cognac formed in 1526 after the sack of Rome, pressuring imperial forces to retreat. Yet, scribbled in the margins, you read a note that Clement's agent Sunder Episcopal cover-smuggled dissenting Italian nobles into fortified monasteries during secret emigration trains. According to fringe accounts, some transported nobles never reached safety but were quietly eliminated by Swiss guards out of necessary precaution. Historians still argue whether the Papal States, clandestine network, protected dissidents, or eliminated political liabilities. You edge toward a long oak credenza, topped with battered trunks. One trunk's label reads, Boniface, 8, Outrage. You unlatch the catches and find court transcripts from 1297. Letters between Pope Boniface VIII and King Philip IV of France. They argue bitterly over taxes on the clergy, a spat that escalated into the infamous outrage of Anagni, where Boniface was kidnapped by French forces. Official Vatican records bluntly summarize, dispute resolved amicably. Yet, tucked into the trunk's false bottom is a fragment of a letter in ancient French. It's describing a plan to poison Philip's envoys at the Papal Palace, a scheme aborted at the last moment by cooler heads. The margin bears a doodle of a dagger beside a chalice. Cue cough. Imagining medieval court intrigue more twisted than any binge-worthy drama. Historians still argue whether that doodle was an actual assassination blueprint or a scribe's macabre doodle. Just beyond, An alcove holds an ancient mahogany chest lined with crimson velvet. Its arcane brass lock displays the coat of arms of Pope Alexander VI Rodrigo Borgia. It's the Renaissance's ultimate scandal magnet. Side, you find rotating parchment cylinders inscribed with a spidery handwriting. These are the rumored Borgia ciphers, believed to detail expeditions funded by the papacy to establish secret colonies in the New World long before Columbus. Mainstream scholars agree that Alexander VI issued colonization bulls in 1493. But there's no record of covert missions in 1491. Fringe enthusiasts claim these ciphers outline a clandestine Borgia settlement in Florida, smuggled priests, and treasure caches buried in swamps. You lift one cylinder and tilt it into the lantern glow. The labyrinthine symbols almost shift under your gaze. Historians still argue whether any of Rodrigo's secret New World plans ever moved beyond ink on parchment or our elaborate forgeries. By nostalgia-driven collectors, you resist the urge to unroll every cylinder and instead turn your attention to a slender folder labeled Cold War Correspondences. You slide the folder free and find cable traffic between the Secretariat of Cocode Cles, of Quetzalcoatl Males. You resist the urge to unroll. I couldn't resist the urge to unroll every cylinder. I could resist a cantillery on the second. Coco Cleas lived. Males. You slide the folder. 6. I live. I live 7. Males. I live Males. By me. You live Males. We live. We live. I live. I live. We live. We live. We live, we live, we, so I get, yeah, I say, yeah, I got, you, to, I got, you, as soon as I need to see if I say, side the cadets, we did State and ambassadors in Moscow. One telegram dated 1952 reads, recommended operational pause until American nuclear tests conclude. Maintain public neutrality. Another ominous entry, Notes Project, code names sharing initials with Vatican departments, DP, SS, DG, yet their meanings are obscured. Local lore spins a fringe tale. The Vatican possessed anti-communist saboteurs trained in an enchanted chapel beneath St. Peter's, armed with relic-infused bullets. Shots allegedly fired at Kremlin officials disappeared from KGB files in a single night. Whether that chapel ever housed covert agents or simply served as an overactive imagination's backdrop remains debated. Historians still argue whether the Holy See was a passive spiritual actor or an active, clandestine force in the ideological battlefield of the Cold War. Your lantern flickers, and you fumble in the dim light for the exit sign, half expecting it to be another iron door weighted with scrolls. The stale vermouth aroma recedes as you step back into the corridor. The echoes of secret treaties and covert missions trailing behind you like a cryptic soundtrack. You pat your notes, heart still, thumping from too many near misses with explosive revelations and redacted telegrams. Those documents rebels in coffer glimpses of a church not only concerned with souls, but with power, politics, and sometimes unimaginable alliances. You pause at the doorway, glance back at the silent desks, and almost expect the ghosts of scheming cardinals to beckon you in for one last teat. But duty calls you onward, deeper into the Vatican's labyrinthine distinctions between piety and pragmatism. As you seal the door, you can't help but wonder, what's the tipping point between spiritual guidance and political machination? And which of these conspiracies will emerge next to challenge everything you thought you knew about the Holy See? You descend a narrow spiral staircase carved into ancient Roman stone, each step echoing like a muted drumbeat in a hidden catacomb. The air grows heavy, cool and damp, carrying the faint metallic temps of centuries-old mortar. You can almost hear the distant drip of water seeping through cracks, like a whispered countdown to discovery. Ahead, the stairwell opens onto a vast underground expanse beneath St. Peter's Basilica. No grand facade here. Just low vaults supported by massive travertine columns. Candlelight flickers off polished marble slabs, and you feel the hush of thousands of souls entombed in hallowed hush. If the Archivio Segreto was cold, this place is bone-chilling. You step carefully over ancient mosaic floors, their tesserae forming half-forgotten symbols of fish and chiro, visual echoes of early Christian artistry. A mainstream fact, in the mid-20th century, archaeologist Margherita Garducci led excavations that uncovered what many accept as St. Peter's tomb. It's a simple grave beneath the high altar bordered by graffiti from pilgrims dating back to the 2nd century. The discovery confirmed traditions that the Apostle Peter was buried here after his martyrdom in Rome. Historians still argue whether the bones found in the so-called red wall niche truly belonged to Peter himself or to an unknown Christian dignitary of the early church. Polishing your boots on crushed shell mosaics. You approach a series of narrow alcoves, each housing a sarcophagus or burial niche. Most are labeled in neat modern Latin script: Iones Paulus II, Benedictus. 16, Pius XI, recent popes whose remains rest in crypts still accessible to pilgrims. Yet beyond these public tombs lies a warren of unmarked recesses. You spot one marble enclosure bearing only a small plaque engraved Ignoto Episcopus. A fringe rumor whispers that this crypt holds the remains of a bishop who vanished after threatening to expose clandestine church secrets in the 12th century. Some say he was entombed alive to silence him forever. Whether that chilling fate befell anyone or is simply monks, campfire lore remains murky. Historians still argue whether there ever was a forgotten bishop sealed within these walls, or merely an elaborate cautionary tale. You trail your fingers across the cool surface of a slab-marked Pontificum Vitae and feel a pulse of reverence. These are early, unnumbered popes predating formal papal numbering systems. The marble has long since lost its original polish, worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims kneeling in prayer. A subtle scent of incense lingers, as if a hidden chapel nearby still burns charcoal embers. You imagine flickering censer chains swinging through the darkness, sending smoke tendrils racing toward vaulted ceilings. A whispered fringe tidbit tells of a secret underground chapel devoted to the liberated martyrs. Saints whose names were erased from official calendars but who continue to receive clandestine veneration beneath the basilica's floor. Historians still argue whether any such unsanctioned shrine truly exists or is merely the product of pious imagination. Pressing onward, you find yourself in the Grotta di Sebastiano, a smaller crypt reputed to house the Christian martyrs' remains. Here, niches hold dozens of small marble headstones, each marking a scarce grave of unknown Christians buried anonymously during persecutions. You squat beside one small recess and read chipped letters. Mathevs Disip, for you can translate. More, a gust of cold air brushes past, swirling tiny motes of dust like ghostly fireflies. You shiver, half expecting the spirit of a long-dead worshipper to lean in for a quiet benediction. You remind yourself of the Gospel of Mary tucked away in the archives just because it's a fringe belief doesn't make it untrue. Historians still argue whether these unlabeled burial sites were mass graves for persecuted believers or simply overflow cemeteries for unremarkable residents of medieval Rome. Your lamp illuminates a wrought iron grille that guards access to a section marked Tumbi Majorque. Beyond the bars lie 5 stone sarcophagi carved with angelic faces, filigreed vines, and coats of arms. One chunky coffin features a papal tiara flanked by two crossed keys in bas-relief. Word has it, this is the resting place of an obscure pope. From the Avignon Papo to perhaps Benedict XII, whose memory the Curia preferred to keep geographically distant. The marble lid bears grooves so deep they might have been claw marks. A quirky rumor insists these grooves were not stonework, but the result of an enraged cardinal banging on the lid to revive the pope's body after rumored poisoning. Whether any pope really gave those indignities, or if this is just traveler's gossip, remains part of the vault's dark charm. Historians still argue whether Avignonera papal burials ever made their way back to Rome, or if they languish in French soil. You crouch and peer through the grille, gingerly tracing your breath on cold iron bars. In this remote corner, even muted, footsteps feel loud, and the absence of guide ropes or signage intensifies the secrecy. A stray mouse scurries across a mosaic depicting loaves and fish. And you laugh softly. Hunger from all this subterranean exploration is starting to kick in. You rummage in your pack for a granola bar, but hesitate. Any crumb could violate preservation rules. You decide to snack later, maybe outside under the warm Roman sun. Unlike the goosebumps you're racking up now, your path curves beneath a narrow tunnel lined with brick vaulting. Dampness drips from overhead, leaving dark patches that resemble ominous note scrawls. At the tunnel's end, you find a concealed hatch in the floor, its edges barely visible under centuries of dust. A plain brass handle glints in your lantern's glow. According to fringe lore, this hatch leads to the Archivum Sepulchrum, a brick-top chamber containing burial records of laity interred in cloistered orders, families who donated fortunes to the church in exchange for secret entombment privileges. These records, if discovered, could trace elite Roman genealogies back to the empire's darkest days. Historians still argue whether such records exist or were destroyed to prevent blackmail and inheritance disputes. Heart-pounding. You grip the handle and pry up the heavy cover. The iron grinds against stone, sending a low moan through the tunnel. Beneath, a faint glow beckons. You lower yourself carefully, lantern in hand, into a triangular shaft. The smell shifts abruptly to earth, an aged cedar-like, opening an old family chest in your grandparents' basement. At the bottom, you discover shelves lined with scroll cases wrapped in cloth, each labeled with dates and family crests. Ivory tags hang from leather ties, some scratched with names like de Medici and Savonarola. Your pulse races. These are legitimate note cases of secret patron burials. You're holding centuries of social history in your hands. Whether these archives are authentic or elaborate forgeries compiled by monastic archivists remains a hot debate among Renaissance scholars. Historians still argue whether any genuine Medici patronage documents survived the iconoclast fervor of 16th century reformers. You slide a cloth aside to reveal a sealed clay cylinder. It bears a curious imprint, a winged key crossed with a sword. At once, you picture that alchemical cabinet back in the Archivio Segreto, the one rumored to hold transmutation recipes. Could these symbols be related? You resist the urge to topple the cylinder, reminding yourself of the brittle state of whatever parchment or papyrus might lie within. Instead, you tuck your lantern to the side and take a long, slow breath. This chamber, more than any archive vault or council room, hums with the weight of unspoken legacies, knights, nobles, secretive donors, and forgotten clerics, all resting side by side beneath one of Christendom's greatest monuments. Climbing back up through the hatch, you pause to wipe sweat from your brow despite the chill. Exploration is hard work. You glance back at the iron grill, the sarcophagi, and the buried staircase behind you, then up toward the sunlight dancing at the spiral stairs top. As you emerge into the daylight-drenched nave of St. Peter's, you feel lighter, yet strangely tethered to the earth you've just left behind. Above you, Michelangelo's grand dome catches the sun. Below, untold stories sleep in silent stone. And you carry a single burning question. Which burial account, once revealed, will rattle the foundations of faith and power? You slip into a low-ceilinged chamber where the stone walls seem to pulse with quiet knowledge, as if they breathe alongside the parchments they guard. Lanterns overhead cast soft, wavering halos on rows of glass display cases. Inside each case lies a codex, some bound in scarred leather, others in embossed vellum so pale it could pass for moonlight. Your fingertips itching to trace the embossed symbols etched in gold leaf, but you know better than to touch. Ahead, a small plaque announces Codex Vaticanus 3786. One of the Vatican Library's medieval manuscripts dating to the 11th century, a mainstream fact that underscores the library's vast collection of over 75,000 handwritten codices. Historians still argue whether such vast numbers resulted from systematic preservation or simply luck and the Church's appetite for documentation. The room fragrance is an odd cocktail of musty paper, polished wood, and a faint hint of vanilla. From modern archival treatments, you step closer to a slender volume with a spine so cracked its fractured veins resemble a lightning strike. This is the rumored Codex Arcana, whispered among archivists, but never officially catalogued. Its cover is emblazoned with 3 interlocking circles enclosing strange glyphs that glow faintly when the lantern light catches them just so. You imagine yourself staring at those circles as day turns to duskwood. They begin to shift, forming new patterns, like an ancient kaleidoscope. Fringe scholars claim the glyphs are a key to unlocking Hermetic wisdom passed down from Hermes Trismegistus himself. Historians still argue whether any Hermetic writings in the West reached the Vatican before the rediscovery of the Corpus Hermeticum in the Renaissance. You lean in, squinting at a page where medieval ink bleeds through to the opposite leaf. Lines are penned in a script so minuscule you need a jeweler's loupe to read them. Oddly, half of the text is in Latin, while the other half is in a cipher that looks nothing like any medieval shorthand you've studied. One quirky rumor asserts that the cipher is a coded recipe for an elixir of life, blending crushed emerald, powdered rhubarb, and tears harvested at dawn. You shiver at the thought of crying into vials for immortality, one tear to few, and the potion supposedly fizzles. Whether that elixir was ever concocted or is a mono aware of letters lost to time remains simmered in scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether any genuine longevity formula ever escaped monastic prescription books next to the Arcana. You find a hefty tome bound in faded crimson leather. Smooth surface feels almost silky under your glove as you gingerly slide the book from its cradle. The first page opens on an elaborate diagram, concentric circles labeled with zodiac, signs, planetary symbols, and a ring of unknown squiggles. Beneath, a note in a 15th century hand reads, Lumen ad animam dedigendum. Light to reveal the soul. Could it be a tool for astrotheological insight? Fringe occultists maintain it's an astral map guiding initiates through the celestial spheres to commune with angelic intelligences. Mainstream research confirms that Renaissance scholars like Pico della Mirandola dabbled in combining astrology and Christian theology, though there's no evidence they used Vatican-approved codices for summoning stellar spirits. Historians still argue whether the Church tolerated such esoteric study or quietly disavowed it to preserve doctrinal purity. Your lantern trembles as you approach a narrow shelf housing 3 identical-looking manuscripts wrapped in faded green cloth. A small metal tag reads Codices Gemelli, Twin Codices. You unwrap one and find it filled with micrographic script words formed by tiny drawings of birds, fish, and twisted branches. The second codex features marginalia so profuse that every inch of the page bursts with whimsical caricatures, robed monks skateboarding on parchment waves, mischievous cats batting at quills, and a devilish figure slipping a priest a wink. You can't help but grin at the medieval monk's sense of humor. Who knew Gothic scribes had a penchant for doodle art? Historians still argue whether this scribal whimsy was a subtle act of rebellion or simply writer's block cures. The third, twin codex, is the most unsettling. Its pages are scribbled in a scratchy, almost frenetic hand, as if the scribe wrote in a fever dream. Marginal notes worn in shaky script, peri cicatricum mens nascit. Roughly, through scarring, the mind is born. Below, odd diagrams depict a human head in profile, veins branching like roots, connected to sketches of keys and locks. You imagine a clandestine ritual where initiates carve tiny notches into their temples, unlocking psychic insider madness. One fringe anecdote claims a cardinal attempted the rite in secret. Its pages discovered when he was confined for spiritual instability. Whether that cardinal ever existed or is the invention of lurid gossip continues to fascinate researchers. Historians still argue whether hidden, mystical rites ever cross the barrier from legend into practice. Your chest tightens as you spot a final glass case at the room's far end. A codex propped open, its pages glowing with faint phosphorescence. It's bound in midnight blue, vellum inlaid with silver filigree. You recognize the script immediately, shorthand, but the letter forms are elongated, flowing like Arabic calligraphy. Or could they be secretive? The accompanying plaque claims it's the Codex Syriacus Secretus, a text reputed to merge Syriac Christian liturgy with early Jewish Kabbalistic symbols. Mainstream studies acknowledge the Syriac liturgical tradition's richness, but no documented link to Kabbalah exists in Vatican records. Fringe mystics hold that this codex is the missing link between Christian and Jewish mystical streams, harmonizing angels' names in a syncretic chorus. Historians still argue whether any such cross-cultural manuscripts ever reached Rome or perished in medieval pogroms. You stroke your chin, swallowing as the lantern's heat warms your fingertips. The room feels alive. Each manuscript a silent chimera, bristling with hidden potential, portals to forgotten philosophies, magical pragmatics, and contested truths. A soft click behind you makes you whirl, heart-pounding, half expecting a guard, or an unseen librarian admonishing you for even glancing too long. But the shadowy corner remains empty, as if this hush-hushed domain is content to let its mysteries whisper on. You replace the Syriacus Secretus, gingerly closing its glass barrier, and step back into the dim corridor. The codice's glyphs swirl at the edges of your vision like ghosts of unspoken incantations. Your notes are heavy with questions. Are these codices genuine medieval texts or artful forgeries? Do they contain forgotten wisdom or simply allegories that fed clerical fears? Each sealed volume is both promise and puzzle, and you're left standing before an open case of possibilities as you exit. The corridor lights flicker, and you hear the thrum of the archive's climate system resuming full power. You let out a soft laugh. Your ambition to unlock secret lore feels both thrilling and absurd. But you know you'll be back, drawn by the lure of coded manuscripts that hide in plain sight, each one refusing to yield its riddles without a fight. Which glyph will crack first, okay? And what secrets will tumble into the open when it does? You slip through a narrow portal marked Ritual's Exorcist Enemy and feel the air thicken with a scent of smoldering frankincense and damp stone. Lantern light dances across rows of leather-bound volumes stamped with crosses and chained to heavy oak shelves. Each book a silent witness to the church's battles with the unseen. You pause, inhale that distinctive mix of resin and mildew, and wonder if the walls themselves remember the anguish and relief scribbled onto these pages. This is where the Vatican keeps its exorcism chronicles, and you're about to leaf through. Stories that blur the line between faith and frenzy. You pull down a massive tome titled Liber contra Daemons. It's bound in scarlet-tinged vellum. Inside, you find the 1542 papal bull De Exorcismis et Supplicationibus Quibustam, issued by Pope Paul III to formalize exorcism rites, a mainstream fact that codified the Church's official response to demonic possession during the Counter-Reformation. The Latin incantations curl across the page in disciplined columns, each prayer meticulously numbered for liturgical precision. Yet beneath the neat lines, you spot a marginal note in shaky handwriting. Ad ignem cruentum, to the bloody fire, hinting at more brutal methods some exorcists quietly employed. Historians still argue whether those darker rituals were widespread practices or isolated abuses that clergy later regretted. By your side, a smaller volume bound in charcoal gray leather carries the handwritten minutes of the first Vatican appointed exorcist, Father Gabriel Amerth. It's from 1986. You skim through accounts of exorcisms performed in Rome's back alleys, where shaken parishioners claim to spew nails and growl in languages unknown to any living tongue. You almost laugh, picturing a Catholic version of a rock concert gone off the rails. No stage diving, just spiritual headbanging. One quirky tidbit tucked into an appendix describes a distraught young man who burst into uncontrollable hiccups whenever the exorcist commanded in Nomen Patris. The hiccups persisted for hours, until, allegedly, a pinch behind the ear banished the demon of indigestion rather than any infernal spirit. Your lantern flickers as you turn the page to discover a locked envelope pinned inside Liber contra Daemons. Inside, you find leaflets from the 17th century, featuring woodcut illustrations of devils being chased by robed priests, dramatic enough to grace any modern horror poster. One engraving shows the demon Belphegor slipping on a discarded friar's slipper, an oddly slapstick moment amid ritual solemnity. You chuckle, recalling the disciplined quills of council scribes just a few floors up, now contrasted with these piteous demon doodles. Historians still argue whether such caricatures served as teaching tools or were subversive jabs by weary scribes who'd seen too many midnight exorcisms. Gingerly, you close that envelope and reach for a folio titled Case 42, a mid-19th century dossier detailing an exorcism in rural Italy. A small plaque nearby notes that Pope Leo XIII introduced the prayer to St. Michael in 1890 after a surge of reported possessions in Roma. It's mainstream fact that gave the people their own demon-defying mantra. Flicking through the stained pages, you find transcripts of confession-like interrogations. Utter the name of your master, the exorcist intones, and the afflicted mutters a string of unpronounceable syllables that set the hairs on your neck on end. But the fringe rumor scribbled in pencil down the margin claims the possessed individual spontaneously recited binary code Mitruchala. It's a phenomenon dismissed as scribal nonsense or a 6th century laptop meltdown. Historians still argue whether such anachronistic utterances were genuine mystical phenomena or elaborate hoaxes. Above these dusty folios, key class cabinet holds a single copper chalice engraved with demonic runes. Legend says it once belonged to Father Josu, Spanish Jesuit who traveled to the New World in 1675, using the cup to collect sinful ichor expelled by possessed indigenous villagers. The chalice lacks any official record in church inventories, yet its oxidized surface bears residue that modern chemists claim might be ancient balsam mixed with animal blood. You glance at the tiny vial of residue sealed beside a part scientific sample, part occult curiosity, and imagine a secret forensic meeting where Vatican chemists debate how to catalog the stuff without sparking a scandal. Historians still argue whether these relics mark genuine encounters or were planted to bolster the Church's authority over spiritual frontiers. Your boot echoes on the stone floor as you move to a long table littered with microfiche cards. You slot one into a reader and watch black and white photos dance on the screen. Rooms strewn with overturned chairs, ragged garments, and candles guttering out. One snapshot shows a terrified nun recoiling as a priest in full vestments holds his crucifix aloft. The next, the same room is spotless, as if the devil was never there. You grin at the unexpected aftershot, perfect before and after commercial pitch for cleansing services. Below the images, typed notes catalog each case. The date, location, clergy involved, and the precise number of knocks, screams, and post-exorcism fainting spells. A footnote alludes to additional audio recordings locked in the Sala Acousticorum hidden chamber, where the tapes remain so sensitive. Even the archive's climate system mutes the hum whenever you approach. Historians still argue whether those audio files contain genuine demonic voices or merely decades-old tape hiss. Your lantern begins to flicker more aggressively, as if the shadows themselves are unsettled. You close the microfiche reader and head to the far corner, where a simple wooden box is chained shut. Its label reads, Obscura Rituals. You strike the chain with a soft thud and feel the vibrations. This box contains fringe exorcism, rites deemed too esoteric for official endorsement. Opening a small hatch, you withdraw a brittle scroll inscribed with a ritual to command the weeping specter from hidden crypts, complete with instructions to place a lit candle under a mirror and recite the invocation backward. One ritual note warns that participants must fast for 9 days and eat nothing but sea salt and boiled cabbage recipe, guaranteed to induce visions. Whether divine or dietary, stifle a laugh at the absurdity of salt and cabbage fasting, only to remember the severe Lent fasts practiced by ascetic monks. Historians still argue whether these obscure rituals ever saw actual use or were penned as exercises in medieval intellectual mischief. A sudden draft rustles nearby parchments, and you glance up at the vaulted ceiling, half expecting cryptic script to glow into life. Your heart thumps in time with the lantern's gutter and the distant hum of the archive's climate control, reminding you that you're suspended between tangible records and whispered legend. You pack away your finds, the Liber contra Daemons, the sly hiccup anecdote, the Spanish chalice, the fringe scroll, and let them settle in your satchel like dormant spells. As you step back through the low portal, you realize these exorcism chronicles are more than just collections of prayers and procedures. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's struggle with the unknown, from solemn liturgy to offbeat folk magic. In this archive, saints and scribes grappled with real fear, penned down the chaos, and tried to bring order through ink and ritual. You lock the door behind you and glance back at the empty shelves, silent, yet charged with the echoes of every fierce prayer and every whispered out with you, foul spirit. You zip up your satchel and whisper to yourself, which exorcisms audio recording will finally crack the silence of this hidden hall? You push open a fire-blackened door marked by a single iron cross and step into a chamber cooled by centuries of unbroken secrecy. The air smells of scorched pine and aged parchment, with a whisper of pipe tobacco wafting from an alcove where a skeleton key dangles on a silk cord. Shelves of cruciform cabinets line the walls, their brass plaques tarnished and worn. Processus Templarum reads 1. You slip off your gloves, pulse quickening, and slide open the top drawer. Inside, a stack of vellum parchments bound by red ribbon greets you. The never-published trial transcripts of the Knights Templar. Those warrior monks arrested en masse in 1307 under King Philip IV's orders. A mainstream fact. Pope Clement V officially dissolved the order at the Council of Vienne in 1312. Yet these verbatim interrogations somehow survived, hidden from public view for over 7 centuries. Historians still argue whether the Church suppressed them to protect royal patrons or to hide its own role in the Templars. Downfall. Your lantern casts dancing shadows on a row of glass cases. You choose one labeled Anno Domini 1307 to 1314. Inside rests a single folio inscribed Jacques de Malle, Depositions. You gingerly lift the brittle leaf and find a confession penned by the last Grand Master himself. Scraggly script, wavering between defiance and despair. He denies blasphemy charges, insists the order never worshipped a goat-headed idol, and claims secret meetings were nothing more sinister than after-hours strategy sessions. One quirky rumor scribbled in the margin of a later copy alleges that de Malle scrawled a curse on Philip's lineage. Writ so forceful it allegedly drove to successive French monarchs mad within months. Whether that curse was real or retrofitted by vindictive monks remains fodder for the medieval equivalent of Reddit flame wars. Historians still argue whether the so-called Templar curse was an incendiary legend or a pious myth born of royal panic. You set the folio aside and approach a hulking oak chest chained to the floor. Its lid bears a hand-carved seal, 2 crossed keys flanking a broken sword. You heft the rusted iron hasp and pry it open. Inside lie parchment rolls sealed with wax trial records from Paris, London, and Poitiers. You unroll the Paris transcript first, the top section headlined Delicta Secretorum, Crimes of Secrets. The charges read like a weird Netflix. Pitch, heresy, idolatry, homosexual rights, and most scandalous of all, collusion with church officials to siphon treasure under the guise of crusade funding. You squint at the accusation that Templar bankers bribed to cardinals to turn a blind eye while the order hoarded wealth in temple vaults, enough gold to rival any royal treasury. Historians still argue whether these allegations were genuine indictments or politically motivated slanders concocted by a cash-strapped king. Your lantern flickers as you unroll the Poitiers record, stamped with the fleur-de-lis and an episcopal seal. This transcript seems more clinical. No sensational charges, just terse notes on witnesses claiming to have seen secret Templar meetings in Parisian cellars. One witness swears he glimpsed a hooded brother exchanging PayPal bowls for coated beldies. 4 coated parchments, then burning the originals in a brazier lit by scented oils. You sniff the air, half expecting incense to drift from nearby candles. Could those oils have been the same recipe noted in the coded manuscript's wing? You recall the alchemical runes from Section 6, forming an unexpected chain of occult breadcrumbs. Historians still argue whether Templar rites borrowed from Hermetic traditions or if later occultists simply retrofitted their own fantasies onto the order's legacy. A slender folio catches your eye next, lying atop a pile of sealed rolls. Cover reads, Register Batelli. You pry it open and find a letter dated 1324 from Pope John XXII. It's one of the few popes bold enough to demand the original papers be delivered to Avignon for review. You swallow hard. This letter suggests the papacy itself reviewed and redacted portions of the Templar files before they disappeared into private PayPal vaults. The official summary describes only the order's property transfers and administrative logs, omitting any reference to heretical proceedings. One tongue-in-cheek annotation in a monastic hand doodles a little Templar knight sipping tea and saying, "Sorry, your scandal has been paused for editing." Whether John XXII truly sanitized the record or whether later curators reworked the documents remains fiercely contested. Historians still argue whether the PayPal archives deliberately excised damning evidence or simply preserved what suited their narrative. You notice a sealed envelope tucked in a corner of the chest. Its wax seal bears an unfamiliar emblem, a crescent moon cradling a cross. You break the seal, heart thudding, and find a single sheet inscribed in Old French, a list of knights who vanished without a trace after 1312. These missing Templars are rumored to have regrouped in remote monasteries, sworn to secrecy by coded oaths, never spoken in daylight. Fringe lore claimed some crossed into Iberia and helped finance the Reconquista, while others smuggled extrajudicial Templar gold to Scotland, where it later fueled the rise of Robert the Bruce. You tap the sheet and wonder if any of those knights planted treasure caches by Rosslyn Chapel Association, so persistent it's practically the order's unofficial mascot. Historians still argue whether any of these off-the-book survival tales hold a grain of truth or are simply romanticized. Fables of a fallen brotherhood. Your lantern flickers again, as if the shadows themselves are uneasy with the secrets you're uncovering. You set the envelope aside and swing by a narrow shelf on the opposite wall. Here rest microfilms and zinc plates 19th century facsimiles of the lost tapestries commissioned by Innocent IV. Among them is a tiny image showing a hooded Templar, kneeling before a cardinal, handing over a scroll embossed with the papal seal. The caption reads, Archivum Privilegium. According to mainstream sources, Innocent's commissions cataloged papal privileges granted to the order, tax exemptions, property rights, and the right to build chapels. But what if those privileges concealed quid pro quo agreements, linking Templar military ambitions to papal political aims? Fringe historians suggest the tapestries hid coded maps to underground vaults beneath the Vatican itself, accessible only by nightly cipher. Historians still argue whether any such hidden Vatican vaults ever housed Templar treasure or are the stuff of elaborate treasure hunter fantasies. You pause to flex your fingers, the leather gloves suddenly feeling too tight. A muted drip echoes from a distant corridor. And you recall that exorcism chamber from Section 7 ducts supposedly connect these trial rooms to that archive. So voices never truly die in solitude. You picture an exorcist barging in to banish the ghosts of condemned Templars. It's oddly amusing to imagine prayers drowning out Latin curses and witness testimonies. But this is no comedy. It's the churn of history's undercurrents. You tuck that thought away and return to the oak chest, drawing out the final roll. Its seal bears a papal tiara beneath a double-headed eagle. The script inside is scrawled in cipher, a list of coded rendezvous between Templar preceptors and members of the College of Cardinals. If authentic, it would prove direct collusion between the order and Rome's highest ranks. You run a slender, steel stylus over the cipher and record a single line, 21 Cal, Marti, Inter Episcopos, Sanctae Maria. You slip the stylus into your pockets, cipher or calendar date. You're not sure yet. Historians still argue whether any code-breaking attempt has ever unlocked the true nature of Templar-papal relations. Your lantern grows dim, and you fold the parchments back into their drawers, sealing each with delicate care. You step back, head reeling from centuries of accusation, interrogation, and possible suppression by the very institution meant to uphold truth. The chamber's hush presses in, like parchment closing on a scandalous page. You trace one final memory. The goat-headed idol charges you read earlier. Does that image really lay buried in these transcripts, or was it a smear by power brokers? You close the iron door behind you and feel the first warmth of the corridor return. In your satchel, heavy with whispered testimonies and coded rendezvous, rest the echoes of a brotherhood undone by politics, fear, and perhaps greed. And as you tread back into the candlelit hush beyond, you can't help but ask, which suppressed Templar secret will next surface to rattle the very foundations of church history? You slip through a discreet service door marked with a faded IOR crest short for Istituto per le Opere di Religione, better known as the Vatican Bank, immediately feel the temperature drop. The air tastes metallic, like a fresh breeze, off an underground minting press. Ahead, a narrow corridor of smooth, marble walls gives way to a low-ceilinged vault stocked with steel safes, bigger than your dorm refrigerator. You trail your fingertips across tempered doors stamped with serial numbers, each one guarding ledgers and transaction records no ordinary auditor could touch. You've entered the Vatican's shadow banking world, a mainstream fact. The Vatican Bank was formally established in 1942 under Pope Pius XII to manage charitable donations and church assets separate from state banks, yet it quickly became infamous for murky dealings. In 1982, the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano Whittle's largest private bank exposed hundreds of millions of dollars funneled through IOR accounts, with Archbishop Paul Marcinkus caught squarely in the middle. Do you recall those headlines? Armored cardinals implicated in financial mischief that shook the Vatican's reputation worldwide. Historians still argue whether Marcinkus acted under papal orders or served primarily the interests of Milanese bankers. Your boots echo on the polished floor as you approach a reinforced glass wall revealing rows of deposit boxes. Each box holds a small brass key dangling from numbered tags assets, so sensitive they're kept behind two separate locks and constant surveillance. You spot a plaque noting box 666, which rumor claims houses cash reserves from secret Cold War operations, maybe even payments to anti-communist factions. A quirky tidbit whispers that some depositors handed over priceless art-like Caravaggio sketches, stolen decades ago, hoping the church's sanctity would shield them from theft charges. Whether any masterpieces still rest under velvet cloth in these boxes or quietly resurfaced on the black market remains fodder for backroom chatter. Historians still argue whether the Vatican's vaults ever hid stolen treasures or simply held oversized pledges dot across the vault. A small alcove holds a glass display showcasing a single hollowed-out Bible, a notorious smuggling courier's tool for moving laundered funds. You gently open its gilded cover to reveal a stack of old banknotes marked in different currencies: lira, francs, drachmas, interleaved with wafer-thin sheets of aluminum. Legend claims that in the 1970s, a Vatican official used this Bible to courier money between Rome and Buenos Aires, funding secret anti-Peronist networks. Whether that courier ever wore a cardinal's ring or simply borrowed one for authenticity is part of the lore. Historians still argue whether any such fund transfers were state-sponsored operations or rogue undertakings by overzealous priests. You glide past a row of fortified cabinets, labeled Archivio Affari Non-Publici Non-Public Affairs Archive. Inside, you glimpse a battered file marked Calvi R. for Roberto Calvi, the so-called God's banker who was found hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1982, officially ruled a suicide. Fringe investigators suggest his demise was a mafia retaliation over missing funds. You examine a handwritten memo smudged at the edges, where Calvi thanks Your Holiness for continued trust only, to cross out the phrase in red ink later, adding non credo, I don't believe. Whether that annotation was Calvi's late repentance or a forger's flourish remains hotly debated. Historians still argue whether Calvi died by his own hand or was silenced for knowing too much. Beside the Calvi dossier rests a ledger stamped Operation Moloch, a codename that makes your skin prickle. You flip the worn cover and find entries listing shell companies, front directors with pseudonyms, and coded references to night shipments and Roman candles. One entry notes a substantial credit labeled simply per il segreto, for the secret. You laugh quietly at the pun, imagining churchmen setting off fireworks under cover of fiscal subterfuge. Fringe financial sleuths claim Moloch payments went to fund covert missions. the Vatican Archive won't admit existed possibly support for liberation theology opponents in South America. Historians still argue whether these payments shaped political outcomes or were nothing more than overblown conspiracy theories. Your lantern's reflection shimmers on a steel hatch leading to a subterranean vault beneath. St. Peter's Square access restricted even for most curial staff. You notice the latch glows under ultraviolet light, revealing micro-etched symbols, crossed keys, a serpent devouring its tail, and a stylized dove. Fringe alchemists believe this combination is a coded charm to protect investments from decay or demonic interference. You resist the urge to rub the symbols for good luck and instead take a careful photograph with your phone strictly unofficial. Obviously. Whether those symbols ever had any protective magic or were simply a clerical in-joke. About market cycles is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether Vatican iconography ever crossed into coded financial talismans or remained purely decorative. You cross to a long table where modern digital screens display redacted PDF excerpts, account statements from the last decade. The names are obscured. Client A, Client B, high-profile donor. One line stands out. An anonymous transfer of 5 million euros to a Swiss art dealer on the eve of a high-profile PayPal trip. You squint at the blurred text and wonder if that donation ensured a major museum exhibit or covered hush money for a long-lost scandal. Quirky rumor holds that boxes of unexhibited Caravaggios exchanged hands during those transfers, later finding sanctuary in private collections across Europe. Historians still argue whether these modern digital records hint at ongoing opacity or reflect genuine efforts at transparency. A soft click behind you makes you whirl, almost dropping your lantern. A suited official appears, eyes narrowing at the glowing screens. You unzip your satchel and reveal a copy of that ledger operation Malakand. Watch his pupils dilate. He murmurs, even here, discretion remains the better part of valor, then gestures to a secure terminal. You understand he's offering you a chance to view the unredacted files, but only if you can authenticate via iris scan. You lean in, resting your cheek to the scanner, forfeiting a fragment of privacy for the potential of deeper secrets. The terminal hums. The screen flickers. You see lines of unexpurgated code, bank account names, transaction dates, and comments like Veritas Demani scrawled above transfers. But before you can scroll further, the screen goes black, and alarms murmur in the distance. You pocket your phone, key, latch the hatch behind you, and step into the corridor's warmer air. The official stands beside you, expression inscrutable, as moonlight spills through a grill above. You pat your satchel and murmur, which of these ledgers will cause the next church reform? He offers no answer, only a slight nod that speaks volumes. As you move on, you can almost feel the vault's secrets shifting behind those steel doors, touched files, its contested balances and coded footnotes yearning for daylight. And you carry a single question onward. What price did the church pay to keep its coffers sacred? And which payment will finally break open the vault's last secret? You slip through a steel-reinforced door stamped with a simple plaque, reading Astronomia et Futura, and feel the air grow unnervingly cool, as though you've stepped onto the precipice of both history and hyperspace. The corridor's hum of climate control fades into a low drone, broken only by your own heartbeat. You follow a narrow beam of LED lights sweeping across filing cabinets, their paint flecked like a star map gone to seed. Ahead, a reinforced vault door yawns open, revealing a chamber that smells of old vellum laced with a faint electric tang like ozone after a lightning strike. You're standing in what insiders whisper is the Vatican's UFO investigation archive. Rows of glass display cases line the walls, each containing microfilm reels, annotated photographs of luminous aerial objects. and official memoranda stamped secretum. A mainstream fact. The Vatican Observatory, established by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, has long studied the heavens with telescopes at Castel Gandolfo, yet few mention the files tucked away beneath the archives that catalog unexplained sky phenomena. Historians still argue whether the Church's astronomical pursuits ever overlapped with clandestine investigations of UFO sightings or remained strictly theological. You approach a polished oak desk strewn with microfiche cards. Each card bears notes in meticulous Vatican shorthand coordinates, citing times, witness statements from around the globe. One microfiche marked 1969. Fatima details an apparition over the sanctuary grounds. A glowing orb hovered above the basilica before vanishing in a silent blink. The official annotation dutifully describes it as celestial phenomenon. No threat to faith, but in the margin, a junior archivist scrawled, probably just a drone with too much confidence. You smirk. No one in heaven uploads YouTube videos, yet fringe researchers insist Fatima's third secret referred to extraterrestrial visitation rather than apocalyptic prophecy. Historians still argue whether these marginalia reflect genuine clerical skepticism or sardonic doodles by overworked interns beneath a single overhead lamp. You find a leather-bound dossier embossed with the words Project Angel. Crack it open and discover a ring of Polaroid photos, each showing a glowing disk above St. Peter's Square at various moments. Dawn, dusk, even during midnight masses. One image captures a cluster of parishioners pointing skyward, orbs hovering above. Their rosaries like cosmic halos. A quirky tidbit claims that in 2001, an Italian news crew attempted to film the phenomenon only to have their camera's memory cards inexplicably wiped clean twice. You tap the final photo, half expecting it to dissolve like salt on a rail. If this is art direction, it's on par with Hollywood. Historians still argue whether these photographs document genuine anomalies or are clever illusions, staged for sentimental pilgrim souvenirs. You notice a sealed envelope labeled Scholastica. Observations. Inside lies a transcript of a 1978 briefing given by Jesuit astronomer Father José Funes, who later served as director of the Vatican Observatory. Word is, he relayed testimonies from pilots claiming to see disc-shaped objects moving at hypersonic speeds over the Tyrrhenian Sea. One pilot swore the craft maneuvered like a ballerina on a zero-gravity stage. Impossible by any known physics. The Church's official summary frames these accounts as awe-inspiring wonders of God's creation. But a fringe dossier suggests Funes might have hinted at biological entities behind the cockpit windows, blurring lines between spirit and species. Historians still argue whether Funes's polite euphemisms masked genuine belief in extraterrestrial life or were simply an academic's rhetorical flourish. Your lantern's glow catches on a narrow shelf holding 3 identical binders stamped with the year 1976, coincidentally the same year the U.S. Air Force published Project Blue Book's final report. These binders contain Vatican analyses of Blue Book files annotated to cross-reference sightings with church dogma. You open one and find notes questioning whether silver discs might be angels misunderstood by modern linguistics. You laugh softly, no harp music or wing flapping recorded though. One quirky rumor alleges a late 20th century cardinal insisted eyewitnesses describe these objects as celestial chariots. But the archivists quietly replaced the term with aerial phenomenon before public circulation. Historians still argue whether that editorial choice was semantic, housekeeping, or a deliberate gloss to avoid theological chaos. A sudden breeze brushes your neck, though there are no windows here, only sealed vault doors. You pivot to see a glass Case housing a battered flight suit emblazoned with a PayPal crests said to belong to Cardinal Aloysius Montina Smith, an aviation enthusiast who claimed to chase a UFO formation over the Alps in 1957. The suit's helmet visor is cracked and sprayed with tiny burn marks, as if subjected to plasma discharges. Beneath the suit, an archival plaque notes Montina Smith later became a vocal proponent of cautious investigation, writing memoranda urging the Secretary of State to maintain secrecy for fear of public panic. You trace the burn patterns with your eyes, imagining a 1950s pilot in full cassock, throttling a turboprop on a collision course with the unknown. Historians still argue whether Montina Smith's suit authenticity was verified or if it's a memento repurposed to stoke UFO lore. Your pulse quickens as you notice a locked cabinet in the corner labeled Hush Orders. You kneel and find a fragile stack of yellowed slip sheets, each bearing the PayPal seal in faded violet ink. One sheet reads, "Eyes close, Doperation, Starfall files. Implement immediate recall of all related documents." Another directs nunciatures worldwide to deny all inquiries regarding unidentified phenomena. Just a tad more direct than your average bureaucratic CA memo. You can practically hear the collective sigh of Vatican staff when these orders went out. No drone selfies, no UFO merch, and certainly no leaked TikTok clips. A fringe legend claims one dissident archivist defied the directive, smuggling copies of Starfall reports to the French press, only to vanish days later. Historians still argue whether any defector's fate was more tragedy than conspiracy. Your eyes grow heavy as you gather the materials, the Polaroids, the Project Angel dossier, the flight suits, helmet notes, teas, and the Hush Order slip sand. Tuck them into your satchel. You bury the memory of that electric ozone smell in your mind, like the scent just before a storm, knowing you'll crave it at 3 a.m. The archives overhead hum redoubles, reminding you that the Church's search for truth extends beyond Scripture to the very skies above. You step back into the corridor's softer lights, the glow of stained glass windows at the chapel down the hall visible through a grill above. The hush of centuries meets the hush of modern secrecy, and you feel the archive's magnitude settle in your bones. As you close the vault door, you ponder the greatest question of all. If the heavens hold visitors beyond angels, should the Church open its doors or keep them locked until humanity is ready? You slip through a narrow antechamber lined with velvet ropes. Feel more ceremonial than reland? Enter a high-ceilinged gallery where the walls are almost shockingly bare. A faint scent of shellac lingers in the air, mingling with the cooler note of stone, as if the room itself has just been wiped clean. Spotlights hover in silence, waiting to illuminate works that never made it onto the public itinerary. This is the Vatican's Forbidden Art Gallery, a hushed sanctuary for masterpieces suppressed or spirited away long before crowds could fawn over them. Your eyes drift to an empty alcove fronted by a polished wooden pedestal bearing a single placard. Michelangelo Tondo della Disputa, 1508. Mainstream fact: Michelangelo famously painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling between c. 1508 and 1512, under Pope Julius II's patronage, revolutionizing high Renaissance art. What you're looking at now is rumored to be a preliminary circular panel, depicting a heated debate between cardinals, hence Disputa, which Michelangelo supposedly abandoned when Julius demanded a grander theme. Historians still argue whether this Tondo was ever more than a sketch in red chalk or if a full-scale painting existed and was quietly tucked away when the project expanded. A soft tap behind you makes you whirl, half expecting a guard to shush you. Instead, you find a small plaque marking an inset drawer. You slide it open and reveal a set of weathered wooden frames stacked tightly together. Each frame holds a fragment of canvas painted in muted blues and browns. These are heraldic. Studies by Raphael sketches of papal insignia rumored to incorporate clandestine family crests of noble donors. Fringe lore suggests Raphael painted secret emblems of the Borgia family into St. Peter's Commission works, literally hiding their coat of arms beneath layers of plaster. You trace your fingertip along one faint fleur-de-lis and imagine conspiratorial nods across Renaissance dining tables. Historians still argue whether these hidden crests were genuine commissions or later attributions by art thieves eager for provenance. You move toward a silent alcove where the walls gape like open tombs. Bronze hooks poke out of the plaster of Athens that canvases once hung here. A subtle echo of footsteps reminds you of earlier explorations. The hush of the exorcism chamber, the hush of the Templar transcripts. This hush feels deliberate, a curated absence meant to spark wonder. A single spotlight illuminates a blank canvas mounted at eye level. A plaque beneath reads Caravaggio. Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence, 1609 suppressed. In 1609, Caravaggio fled Rome amid scandal, leaving behind commissioned works. Mainstream art historians agree he completed at least 2 versions of a nativity scene, one of which reportedly offended churchmen by including a startled St. Francis in a comical pose. Legend has it the original was carted off and replaced by a tamer version in the oratory of San Lorenzo. You press your hand against the blank frame, imagining the brushstrokes swirling luminous halos off an infant Christ. Fringe stories claim the suppressed Caravaggio hangs in a private Vatican chapel reserved for visiting heads of state. Historians still argue whether any version beyond the documented replicates ever existed or if the tale grew from rumor. A low shelf beneath the blank canvas holds a narrow clamshell box. You lift the lid to reveal a clutch of silver point sketches. Fine lines shimmering on darkened cardstock. These are attributed to Michelangelo's pupil, Sebastiano del Piombo, whose own career soared under Clement VII. One sketch shows a nude male figure mid-crouch, muscles rendered with anatomical precision, to frank from most church walls. This rejected atom was allegedly deemed too pagan by the papal commissioners, and the sketch was shoved into a drawer before Clement's death. You turn the delicate leaves and almost expect the figure's eye to follow you in condemnation. Whether Del Piombo's nude study influenced Michelangelo's own Sistine atom remains a point of contention. Historians still argue whether these sketches are genuine preparatory works or Victorian-era forgeries meant to discredit Renaissance morality. Lamplight dances on a glass cabinet nearby, casting reflections on a single gilded frame housing an oil painting no bigger than a postcard. The plaque identifies it as Montaigne, Saint Sebastian with hidden emblem, 1490. Oddly, the saint's arrow-pierced torso carries a tiny monogram scratched into the thigh, like a graffiti tag from the 15th century. A quirky rumor has it this monogram is actually the signature of a minor Sienese painter who illegally collaborated with Montaigne, then erased from official records. You peer closely, squinting to decipher the initials IC or perhaps TC. Historians still argue whether this monogram was a marginalized artist's desperate plea for recognition or a later addition by souvenir hunters who mistook the saint's wounds for scribbles. You wander to a corner where a solitary easel stands under a motion sensor spotlight. On it rests a leather-bound folio titled Giotto's Lost Panels. Giotto di Bondone, considered the father of Western pictorial art, painted fresco cycles across Italy in the early 14th century. The folio claims 2 panels from his Ognissanti Madonna. Altarpiece were removed in 1315 for showing 2. Much grief on the Virgin's face, apparently too raw for medieval piety. A tiny reproduction shows the Virgin in tears with 2 blood-red drops trailing down her cheek. The folio's provenance is sketchy, coming from a private collector rumored to be a disgraced cardinal. French historians insist these panels were sold to the Ottoman court in the 15th century and now reside in a Turkish palace. Historians still argue whether Giotto ever depicted such graphic sorrow or if the story is a myth born of Victorian romanticism. Just beside the easel, you spot a slim notebook chained to a lectern. Inside are Polaroid photos of a half-restored fresco unveiling under Thor, St. Peter's Dome in 1953. Mainstream restoration. Records acknowledge that Pope Pius XII commissioned conservation work then, but they don't mention an overpainted portrait of a youthful Catherine of Siena gazing directly at viewers. One photo in the notebook captures her eyes catching camera flash an uncanny moment, as if the saint herself blinked. A fringe theory claims the Vatican cover-up erased her presence to avoid theological confusion over saintly intercession. You flip through pictures showing restored color ledgers next to laser scans of hidden underdrawings. Historians still argue whether the Catherine portrait ever existed or was simply a photographer's double exposure. A drafty corner reveals a tiny door painted the same hue as the wall. Push it open and find yourself in a miniature storehouse, where wooden crates bear badges, Sistine Conservation, Privateau, USO. Inside, paintings of saints draped in Byzantine gold leaf lean against rough stone. One Madonna whose eyes have been nicked out. Another Christ harrowing hell with Christ's feet scuffed as if someone stumbled while removing it. You squint at one crate label scrawled in pencil. La Fornerina. Raffaello, the portrait of Raphael's lover. Margherita Ludi, known as La Fornerina. The portrait's sensuality incensed moralists, and the painting was supposedly spirited away to a private palazzo. Near the crate, you find a glove dangling from a nail, stained with a soft, powdery residue that looks suspiciously like paint. A quirky aside, some say the residue was mixed with rosewater, as if the painting itself wept when it was hidden. Historians still argue whether the original La Fornarina disappeared for love, lust, or pragmatic cleaning. You close the mini warehouse door, careful not to bump the crates. The room's hush returns, amplified by your own breathing. Every empty hook, every blank canvas, every locked folio resonates with stories of art deemed too bold, too intimate, or too controversial for its time. In this gallery of silences, you feel whispered yearnings of pigment and brushworks that dared to speak truth to power and were silenced for it. As you step back into the main corridor, you catch a glimpse of Michelangelo's Tondo hovering. In your mind, Raphael's hidden crests dancing at the edges of your vision. It's Caravaggio's Nativity glowing faintly on that blank wall. The Forbidden Art Gallery reminds you that, beyond sculpture and scripture, the Vatican's greatest masterpieces might be those that never see the light of day. And you're left wondering which suppressed painting will re-emerge to rewrite art history next. You slip through a larched doorway marked Simply Predictions and step into hushed half-light, as though crossing a threshold between time itself and a silent suspend of fate. The air is thick with the faint musk of laid-out parchments, overlaid by the sweet trace of myrrh like catching a whiff of aged incense at the back of a church you once dozed through. Bookshelves curve around the walls in concentric arcs, creating a circular chamber that feels like an oracle's ear. Cup, waiting to catch your every breath. You brush your fingertips along a row of iron-bound books stamped with the year. 1595, a mainstream fact. That's when the prophecy of the popes, attributed to Saint Malachi, first surfaced in manuscript form under Arnold Wyon's compilation. Historians still argue whether Malachi truly penned these cryptic lines in the 12th century, or if a clever forger in the late Renaissance streamed them up to curry favor with a hungry papacy. A single lantern hangs from a wrought iron bracket, casting a golden pool of light onto a lectern carved with angelic wings. On it rests a fat codex bound in fox-brown leather, its title embossed in fading gilded letters, Liber Vaticiniarum Secretum. You open the clasps with a soft click and inhale a whisper of cracked leather and powdered cedar. The pages are filled with neat Latin couplets, each one predicting a grievous or glorious event tied to future pontiffs. One line reads, De labor Solus regrediens, rosas reclinabiter. A prediction, fringe lore claims. That foreshadows a pope struck by solar eclipse on the day of his abdication. You chuckle to yourself. Solar eclipses are nature's own mic drop, but the odd interplay of astronomical events and spiritual authority in these lines feels like astrology met theology in a dark alley. Historians still argue whether these verses ever guided papal conclaves or simply amused tertiators in monastic refectories. You close the Liber Vaticiniarum and turn to a narrow wooden shelf where dozens of slender scrolls stand upright like stalks of wheat. One scroll bears the seal of Pope Innocent XI and is tied with a burgundy ribbon. You untie it and unroll the brittle parchment to reveal a prophecy in a shaky 17th century hand, claiming that a city forged by wind will rise against Christendom. A quirky tidbit inscribed in the margin in a later hand, perhaps by an Overweiger archivist, identifies that wind city as Chicago, predicting an American pope emerging from the Midwest. You smirk, imagining cardinals debating whether a prophecy could foresee skyscrapers and jazz. Historians still argue whether Innocent XI's personal notebooks truly contained scribbles about the New World, or if later, collectors retrofitted them to thrill believers and boost document value. To your right, a carved niche holds a small iron chest covered in cryptic symbols, a cross interlaced with a serpent. Inside, you find narrow vellum strips rolled so tight they threaten to crack if you try to read them flat. These are private visions attributed to Pope Pius X, scribbled in the early 20th century. One fragment warns of a storm of broken voices and shattered roses, which fringe scholars insist points to the rise of radio broadcasts and the loss of Latin Mass in the mid-20th century. You squint at the delicate script and joke to yourself that if Pius X predicted FM waves, he was either divinely inspired or had surprisingly good futuristic Wi-Fi reception. Historians still argue whether these Pius X notations were penned by the Pope himself or by an overzealous secretary aiming to dramatize his pastoral letters. Your lantern flickers high, and you let its soft glow dance across an alcove where a massive codex slumps against the wall. This is the so-called Chronicon Futuri, Pontificis, rumored to contain prophecy verse for every pope from Gregory the Great to the last act of history. Legend has it that the final line reads, Obitus ostended novissima signa, promising that when the last pope's death is announced, signs of the world's end will appear. The mainstream church rejects any apocalyptic reading of these verses, yet a handful of theological students still scour microfilm copies for coded references to solar flares and pandemics. Historians still argue whether the Chronicon is an authentic medieval prophecy cycle or an early modern pastiche stitched together by monastic scribes with more ink than caution. Nearby, a glass display case houses an ornately decorated manuscript, labeled Codex Vatizinandi Conclave. It's a small, leather-bound tome no larger than your palm. Its pages illustrated with miniature portraits of past popes and cryptic runes beside each likeness. A quaint rumor purports that the conclave's cardinals were once guided through secret prophecy readings from this very codex, reciting one verse each day to divine the next, elections outcome imagine PayPal voting with daily tarot draws. You laugh softly at the image, picturing a cardinal exclaiming, "I draw number 4, does that mean I vote for myself?" Historians still argue whether any conclave ever consulted such a codex, or if the entire notion is a 19th century romantic invention. Your gaze drifts to a dusty corner where a plain oak box lies half buried beneath a pile of ledgers. You lift the lid and find dozens of small wax seals attached to tags, each seal bearing a prophecy's opening line clipped from its parchment. One tag reads, "Silva cadentibus rosi florbit," hinting at wars, followed by peace. A picky archivist's note scrawled in blue ink accuses the original scribe of poor poetry. You giggle quietly. Who knew prophecy editors suffered writer's block? Historians still argue whether these seals were part of a failed prophet motive, selling individual prophecy lines as relics or a scribal system for cataloging multitudes of predictions too unwieldy for full manuscripts. A sudden hush falls as you realize the door has creaked closed behind you. The only sound is your own breath and the faint hum of distant climate controls. You lean down to open a leather roll labeled De Secretis Conclave and find a broken quill trapped inside an artifact, said to have penned the last verse predicting Vatican II's reforms. One quirky anecdote claims that council fathers, upon learning of the prophecy, rearranged meeting agendas to avoid ticking off future revelations. Historians still argue whether that quill even belonged to a cardinal or if it's simply a piece of misfiled stationery, discovered decades later. Your anticipation tightens as you gather the sealed prophecies. Malachi's cryptic mottos, innocent. 11's Midwestern forecast, Pius X's, roses and radio waves, and the miniature conclave codex. Each feels alive under your fingertips, as if the future itself trembles within their lines. You breathe deep, imagining those verses carved as much into history's backbone as into parchment. Before you close the Liber Vaticinorum, you pause to touch its embossed cover one last time, sensing the thrill of peeking at what might or might not be divinely ordained. Humming softly, you slide the books back into their niches and step onto the marble floor, every echo amplified by vaulted silence. The prophecy chamber withdraws into darkness, leaving you with that eternal question: are these PayPal prophecies genuine glimpses beyond the veil of time, or masterful forgeries feeding the church's hunger for destiny? You slip through a narrow service corridor patched with decades-old plaster and feel the air go quiet, so quiet you swear you hear distant prayers bouncing off the stone. Ahead, a heavy bronze door stamped with the Vatican coat of arms creaks, open to reveal a low-ceilinged sanctum lit by a single bank of recessed amber lights. A polished mahogany table spans the center, surrounded by upholstered chairs that look as if they've borne the weight of whispered deals for centuries. Maps of distant lands, some faded beyond recognition, line the walls. You've entered the Vatican's shadow diplomacy room. Your fingertip traces the edge of a folded vellum scroll dated February 11th, 1929. A mainstream fact marking the Lateran Treaty between the Holy See and the Kingdom of Italy, which established Vatican City as an independent state. On the same table, however, lies a second, unpublicized codicil specifying Italian commitments to fund certain underground Catholic networks in Europe. This hidden annex, long omitted from official publications, suggests Mussolini agreed to bankroll clandestine seminaries in Austria in exchange for church backing of his foreign policy. Historians still argue whether this secret annex shaped the church's stance toward Austria's July 1934 coup, or was simply diplomatic chess. You step over a small oil lamp's worn rug and discover a slip of paper pinned under a brass inkwell. Negotiate with besieged networks in Tehran confidential. Your pulse quickens. In the 1980s, the Vatican quietly dispatched envoys to Iran shortly after Ayatollah Khomeini's rise of fringe, tidbit hardy to confirm. Yet whispered among retired diplomats who recall discreet meetings in Rome's lesser-known Nunciature Chapel. According to the rumor, the envoy offered to facilitate humanitarian aid in exchange for limited clerical freedom for the country's tiny Catholic community. Whether these overtures ever progressed beyond coded dinner invitations remains under wraps. Historians still argue whether the Vatican's discreet contact with post-revolutionary Iran was a bridge toward religious tolerance or a pragmatic bid to protect Christian minorities. A rustle draws your eye to a set of bound dossiers stamped Operation Peacegate. You ease one open and find a chain of telegrams between the Vatican, Secretariat of State, and representatives of the Provisional IRA during the Northern Ireland Troubles. You inhale sharply. One message: thanks, trusted intermediaries, for delivering ceasefire proposals to British intelligence. Mainstream scholarship acknowledges the Vatican's pastoral interest in Irish Catholics, but never this level of back-channel mediation. Fringe accounts claim that a cardinal secretly relayed IRA demands for political recognition through a Jesuit priest in Edinburgh, an overture that might have forestalled years of bloodshed. Historians still argue whether these liaison efforts significantly influenced the Good Friday Agreement or remain little more than hopeful legend. On the far side of the table, you notice a small olive wood box carved with Arabic script. Inside, a folded papyrus scroll sealed with wax bears the insignia of Hussein ben Talal, King of Jordan. The scroll is dated 1970, amid Black September's violent clashes between the PLO and Jordanian forces. It outlines a proposed Vatican-led mediation plan to evacuate Palestinian civilians from Amman, promising safe passage under church flag. A mainstream fact: the Vatican did offer to host Palestinian refugees after the Six-Day War. But correspondence vanished once the PLO moved into Lebanese territory. Whether this papyrus represents a genuine diplomatic blueprint or a forger's clever contrivance remains hotly debated. Historians still argue whether Vatican diplomacy saved lives or simply stayed on paper. You drift toward a wall lined with binders labeled Consulta Clandestina. One binder bears a typed label in gentle italics: Saddam Hussein, Cultural Patrimony. Opening it, you find proposals for returning looted antiquities from Iraq to Vatican museums in exchange for guarantees of archaeological protection. You pause over a note scribbled in the margin: should consider trading early codices for Mesopotamian tablets. It's a tantalizing nexus of faith and heritage preservation, but even this appears more like a backdoor barter agreement than public treaty. Fringe scholars maintain that in the lead-up to the 1991 Gulf War, Vatican negotiators offered sanctuary for priceless relics in return for landmarks standing unharmed. Historians still argue whether this cultural diplomacy actually diverted oil revenues or simply facilitated the relocation of artifacts to safe vaults. A sudden hum from overhead lights nudges your attention to a discreet shelf bearing 3 identical folders marked PSR. You lift one: Polish Solidarity Relations, dated 1981. It details secret meetings between Cardinal Wyszynski's aides and Solidarity Union leaders in Warsaw's underground network. Mainstream history confirms the Church's moral support of Solidarity. But here you find operational maps for smuggling manuscripts, forged IDs, and financial flows from European Catholic charities. A fringe footnote suggests the Vatican even funneled radio equipment to Lech Wałęsa's group via Cistercian monasteries. Historians still argue whether these church-led channels tipped the scales in Poland's eventual revolution or simply offered symbolic solidarity. You pull a leather-bound cadre tagged Project Seneco. Inside, A set of lined notebooks detail closed-door conversations with Venezuelan revolutionary circles in the 1960s. The notes reference, influence pastoral care, and propose a church-sponsored agrarian program to quell peasant unrest. Early form of what later became liberation theology. Mainstream accounts mention Vatican concerns about leftist movements in Latin America, but never direct involvement in policy formation. Fringe theologians whispered that a papal envoy drafted blueprints for community cooperatives funded by discreet church loans to undercut Marxist insurgencies. Historians still argue whether these church-led initiatives bolstered social justice or inadvertently lent ideological cover to authoritarian regimes. You lean back in one of the upholstered chairs and listen for footsteps that never come. The room's hush feels deliberate, a threshold between confessionals and the realpolitik of nations. On the table, you spot a singleton scroll labeled Zaire -1978. Opening it, you find a memorandum signed by Cardinal Casaroli, suggesting the Vatican support Mobutu Sese Seko's regime in exchange for safeguarding Catholic schools from VHL, Catholic schools from VA. Nationalization. A mainstream fact. The Church did negotiate educational autonomy in many post-colonial states. But this document implies a quid pro quo, far more transactional than pastoral. Whether the Church's compromise in Zaire protected tens of thousands of students or emboldened a kleptocratic ruler remains. Fiercely contested historians still argue whether such diplomatic bargains served the greater good or compromised moral authority. You gather the scattered documents, telegram transcripts, papyrus scrolls, and olive-wood boxes and feel the weight of history's undercurrent in your satchel. The amber lights dim briefly, as if acknowledging the gravity of these covert accords. You catch your reflection in a polished brass plaque and wonder, can sanctity and subterfuge truly coexist? As you close the bronze door behind you, the hushed echoes of secret negotiations linger like a low chantry, reminding you that the Vatican's influence often unfolds not in grand proclamations, but in silent rooms where words vanish behind heavy drapes, which hidden accord will be unearthed next to reshape our understanding of power, faith, and the Church's role on the world stage. You slip into a windowless antechamber, humming with fluorescent light. Its walls lined with steel filing cabinets, whose ivory labels gleam under the harsh glow. The air smells of ozone and toner, like an office copier that's cheap on maintenance, but heavy on secrets. You tap a cabinet drawer stamped 2000 to 2020. And it opens with the mechanical sigh of a vault conceding to curiosity. Welcome to the Vatican's modern cover-ups, where recent controversies are quietly settled behind closed doors and the records you'll never see. A mainstream fact greets you on a bright yellow folder. In 2012, a Vatican butler leaked thousands of confidential memos and letters, igniting the so-called Vatileaks scandal that exposed power struggles, nepotism, and financial mismanagement at the highest levels. You flip through the memos, feeling the weight of PayPal stationery beneath your fingers. One memorandum details Cardinal Bertoni's frustration with budget deficits so dire that choir vestments were repurposed as cleaning rags. A bureaucrat's version of baptism by mop. Historians still argue whether Vatileaks spurred genuine reforms or merely reshuffled the same deck of curial cards. Next to those memos, a slender binder labeled McCarrick Files stands poised to spill modern scandal. A 2/6 notice from McCarrick Scandal. A 2 to let you know, I'm thinking of you, I'm thinking of you, I'm thinking of you, and thinking of you. And I scare you a slender / McCarrick, a slender mainder. A / McCarrick file, cormenter. McCarrick, 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 McCarrick. I so unconnoted, so, my life. I'm in May, you may, McCarrick, Mayu. Macare. KC says, Mayuda Mayit. UII so I me I use I make I to say I The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith grants you a tantalizing glimpse of redacted correspondence about former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick's alleged misconduct. The mainstream church officially defrocked him that year, marking a watershed moment in the abuse crisis. Yet the cabinet's vault locks reroute you to another drawer. A sealed envelope marked non visium, not to be seen. You wonder? If the blacked-out pages inside contain names of enablers or just dull legalese. Historians still argue whether those redactions were necessary to protect privacy or designed to shield influential figures from scrutiny. You pivot to a glass case set into the wall. Its glass scratched from decades of prodding fingers. Side sits a stack of glossy reports bound by plastic combs investigations into financial irregularities. 2014 to 2017. You leaf through spreadsheets that track dubious wire transfers, offshore accounts, and payments to shell companies disguised as Holy See marketing. One quirky tidbit notes a payment description reading, purchase of 200 sacred relics, approximate. You snort at the idea of relic shopping by subscription box, as if the Vatican supply closet stocked martyrs' thumbs like canned goods. Fringe commentators whisper these transactions fund secret retreats for modernist theologians. Stay. Underground spa where they debate PayPal infallibility over eucalyptus-scented steam. Historians still argue whether such fringe retreats exist or are simply heated imaginations fed by vaporous rumors. Your hand grazes a digital kiosk embedded in the wall. You swipe your thumb and a blurred PDF flickers onto the screen. The 2019 Vos Estis Lux Mundi Guidelines. Pope Francis's landmark decree mandating abuse reporting protocols. Worldwide a mainstream milestone meant to offer transparency. Yet beneath the decree's clear text lies a password-protected annex the screen refuses to display. You tap impatiently, and a warning flashes. Access denied. You picture a seminary professor muttering, "Even our policies have policies." Historians still argue whether Vos Estis Lux Mundi will outlast PayPal transitions or simply add another layer to the Worksalt's rulebook labyrinth. A soft buzz draws your gaze to a row of manila envelopes skewered on a pegboard under the sign Diplomatic Exceptions. You pull down the one labeled Chile 2018 and find a hand-typed report, describing how local bishops negotiated to have abuse allegations handled by diocesan tribunals rather than Vatican courts. The mainstream narrative acknowledges the Chilean bishop's mass resignation that year, forcing Pope Francis to confront his own misjudgments. Yet a fringe line in the report claims that the negotiations occurred over high-end Chardonnay in an opulent Nunciature garden, complete with private flamenco dancers for ambience. You smirk at the Imaja spiritual retreat doubling as an elite soiree. Historians still argue whether the Chardonnay-fueled diplomacy actually eased tensions or merely stirred new scandals, your lantern-like. Flashlight cuts through the dim corridor as you slide open a final drawer marked Digital Cleanup Orders. Inside rests a printed memo dated 2021 instructing Vatican IT to purge online references to an obscure Monsignor accused of mishandling donations. The memo mentions removal from all official websites and archival portals within 90 days. You shake your head at the bureaucratic squishiness of erasing someone from history with a few clicks. One quirky rumor suggests an overzealous intern accidentally wiped the Pope's daily homilies instead. An incident never officially acknowledged. Fringe technophiles claim the Vatican uses custom malware called PayPal Eraser to ensure no backup survives. Historians still argue whether these digital purges reflect necessary data hygiene or Orwellian information control. By now, Pulse keeps pace with the soft hum of server racks hidden behind a white door at the corridor's end. You press your ear against the door, engraved cybersecurity, top secret. Faint lights blink in the gloom beyond, tracing cables like a spider's web. The door clicks locked, and you note a biometric scanner detecting facial temperature, strict no entry for outsiders. You imagine the tech wizards inside defending PayPal emails from phishing attacks, while quietly siphoning suspicious attachments into a black box archive. Historians still argue whether the Vatican cybersecurity measures guard the faithful or serve as a secret firewall around inconvenient truths. You step back into the fluorescent haze, letting the smell of toner and ozone fade behind you. Your satchel brims with photocopies, redacted memos, and stray USB sticks you borrowed from an unlocked drawer strictly for research, of course. A gulp of cool air fills your lungs as you emerge into a corridor where daylight filters through a frosted window, reminding you there's a world beyond these halls. You count the steps until you reach the exit, 37 by the tiles, if you care. The door clicks open, and you feel the living pulse of modern Rome wash over you. Street vendors hawk sandwiches, Vespas weave like mischievous spirits, and cafe baristas grind coffee beans oblivious to the vaults beneath their feet. Before you disappear into the throng, you fold one final memo fatilix, Macarek, Voss, Estes Lux, Mundi, chilly negotiations, and digital cleanups into a pocket. The questions whirl in your mind. Will these cover-ups unravel under tomorrow's headlines? Or will they slip quietly into the archives, never to see the light of day? And which record, still locked away, will finally break the spell of silence and demand to be heard? You place your palm against the last heavy door stained by centuries of candle soot and quietly open it. A wave of stale incense and archival chill greets you, as though the mausoleum of all Vatican secrets has exhaled. The corridor beyond stretches into shadow, lit only by a whispered crackle from an antique lamp powered by an ancient generator. Your heart hammers, but you hush yourself. This is the chamber where the Vatican trusts its final confidences to marble vaults and iron cupboards. It's the end of one labyrinth and the beginning of another. Just you, these walls, and questions older than the church itself. Every corridor you've traversed spills a different shade of enigma. The dusty archives where Cleopatra's letters might linger unread. The alchemical codices with circles etched in gold. The lost gospels hinting at Mary's levitations. Council records with sketches of cosmic cats. The conspiracies that traded Jewish lives for relics. The tombs housing cryptic bishops and carved sarcophagi. The exorcism chronicles of nail-spewing demons. The Templar trials with goat idols and coded gatherings. The bank vaults whispering of laundered art. The UFO dossiers tracking celestial orbs over St. Peter's Square. The forbidden paintings drained from naked walls. The prophecy chamber brimming with apocalyptic couplets. The shadow diplomacy scribbling with kings, rebels, and revolutionaries. In the modern cover-up files where Vata leaks memos meet digital purge orders. Each path is a thread in a tapestry of power, faith, and human ambition. A mainstream fact. Archivists estimate the Vatican Apostolic Archive spans over 85 kilometers of shelving, containing untold volumes dating back to the 8th century, dwarfing most national records and guarding history behind locks within locks. Historians still argue whether this vastness protects collective memory or simply buries inconvenient truths. Yet amid these official halls, you uncover a quirky tidbit, whispered only in hushed refectories, that behind a hidden panel under St. Peter's confessional stalls lies a clandestine wine lounge stocked with rare vintages. where cardinals once met to discuss blacked-out telegrams over deep Amontillado. You laugh at the absurd image of robed dignitaries swirling glasses like amateur sommeliers, yet the stain of fallen drips on marble suggests the rumor might be more authentic than rumor alone. Historians still argue whether these clerical vintages fueled intrigue or were merely vestiges of Renaissance hospitality preserved for ceremonial toasts. Now, standing in this final antechamber, you wonder which secrets will outlive us all. Will the Vatican's true breadth of cover-up digital redactions, concealed correspondences, expunged council debates ever surface? Consider the clandestine dossiers on Pope Pius XII's wartime silence, the hush orders on UFO sightings, the archival cleanups of McCarrick files, and the lost Borgia expedition maps. Each case demands a reckoning. At what point does discretion slip into deception? Historians still argue whether these silences shield the faithful or obstruct collective healing. You trail your finger over an iron latch carved with a PayPal crest and pause, recalling every flutter of parchment and echo of footsteps on cold stone. The line between protective secrecy and historical erasure wavers like candlelight on fresco. You've seen genuine letters of Cleopatra rumored to rest here and glimpsed the inscriptions predicting Chicago-born popes. You've handled coded manuscripts promising immortality and exhumed Templar curses louder than thunder. Some vaults you can approach. Others remain sealed in perpetuity. Which ones are off limits to preserve sanctity, and which hide darker bargains that no archive should barter? In this chamber, no new headings break the hush. Your breath is the only punctuation in a narrative written over millennia. Whatever lies behind the final cupboards, whether unburned gospels, unsolved prophecies, or unspeakable documents, will remain the Vatican's most intimate confessions. You step back, drawn to the cool corridor's light, carrying the weight of unanswered questions like relics in your satchel. The final secret vault waits, uncracked and unclaimed, daring you to wonder, what will the Vatican never disclose, and why will historians argue over it until the last page is turned? In the lingering stillness, you ease back into your chair as the imprint of cold stone and heavy doors slowly melts away, leaving only the soft echo of your own breath. Images of parchment edges, flickering lantern flames, and carved crests drift through your mind like ancient lullabies, beckoning you to release the weight of unspoken histories. A gentle warmth lingers on your skin, as if the room itself reaches out to cradle you in its quiet understanding, whispering that every riddle you encounter is but a step toward deeper wonder. Allow your thoughts to gather softly, like footprints on a sandy shore washed by a slow, rhythmic tide. Each revelation you've held, whether Templar curses under vaulted crypts, prophecies penned by trembling papal hands, or faded wine stains, beneath confessional benches, now drifts away on a calm current. There is comfort in knowing that some mysteries can rest safely within hallowed stone, nourishing the imagination like seeds beneath snow. Feel the gentle stir of dawn as sunlight filters through stained glass windows, painting your dreams with hues of rose and amber. As your eyelids grow heavy, each breath lengthens, carrying the faint scent of myrrh and old oak into the quiet corners of your mind. Here, where faith, history, and intrigue entwine, you remain suspended between wonder and rest, gently rocked by the promise of unanswered questions that have no urgency tonight. Even the grand dome above and the marble stones beneath can rest in patient silence until renewed curiosity rouses you again. Now, slip from the weight of questions into the softness of slumber, where the most profound secrets take shape in gentle imaginings. The echoes of catacombs, coded manuscripts, hidden wine stains, and hush orders will all fade into a gentle, lingering sigh, leaving behind only the quiet thrill of possibility. Rest assured that when morning comes, you may awaken refreshed and ready to seek new mysteries, yet for this moment, you are free to dream. Good night and sweet surrender to the gentle hum of history's lullaby. End of script. Sweet dreams.